Inconsistency between platforms or physical cues is what's going to sell you short from really being perceived as a leader. It's hard to stick in this attention economy if you're inconsistent. So having that really, really clear set of guidelines for this is how I show up in these spaces, and this is how I show up when I'm a guest speaker, and this is how I show up when I'm on a podcast. That's going to help you continue to assert your authority, assert your visual aesthetic, and also assert your leadership and your thought leadership and your own message that you have to share with people. The consistency here is very, very, very key. Greetings and welcome back to the Kiss My Aesthetic podcast. As promised, today's solo episode is going to go over the presentation that I gave for Lead San Diego Advance, which is a women's cohort for leadership in San Diego. I was invited back after being part of their program, so go listen to the episode with Veronica Perandi, the program executive director. And they asked me back to talk to their group about aesthetic authority and establishing your aesthetic authority through visual leadership, which is a big, fun, juicy topic. So this episode is essentially going to be a recap of that talk. Basically, I'm just going to give it to you the way that I gave it in the talk, so that you guys can also have the information, because I didn't design these slides for nothing. So if you'd like to actually see the presentation slides, please switch over to YouTube, because on the YouTube channel, if you're on the YouTube already, good job. But on the YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the actual slide designs that might be helpful for you, as this is a visual-based presentation. But you also know I'm a yapper and I like to talk. So without further ado, styled to lead the intersection of aesthetic and authority. Let's get into it. First and foremost, we can't establish authority without introducing ourselves. So if you don't know me, or maybe this is the first time listening to the podcast, welcome. My name is Michelle. I am the owner and founder of MKW Creative Co. I've been a brand designer for the last 11 years and worked with over 350 brands. As the creative director and founder, I also lead a team of 6. We are fully remote. And I also host this podcast. Content creator, podcast host, was part of the leadership program in 2025. What you might not know about me, you definitely do if you listen to the podcast regularly, but what you might not know is I'm a 4th generation female entrepreneur, all the way back to my great grandmother having her own business. And I actually have a double bachelor's degree in fine arts and art history from the University of San Diego, which is related to my job, of course, but everything business related, I kind of learned on my own or through my family. So the arts degree and the art history degree actually comes very much into play here with how I've compiled this presentation, because we're going to talk about the history of visuals. We're going to talk about why these visuals are so important and how you can use your visual aesthetic to communicate your own thought leadership. So whether you are a executive, a business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just someone who's a creative in a creative field at any level, this will be an important presentation for you, because what I'm arguing here is my thesis, which is your personal brand and your visual aesthetic are the billboard and mirror of your personal thought leadership. And to define personal thought leadership, I want you to think about how you curate your ideas, your spaces, your vision, and your experiences to really deliver a message to your community. So that could be in work, that could be in your personal life, that could be in so many different things. But think about your own personal brand in quotes, and your personal aesthetic as an extension of what you think. Right? That's what we're really going to get into in this presentation. And I've broken that into these 5 different chapters. First chapter, why does it frickin' matter? Why do aesthetics matter in leadership? The second, aesthetic authority feedback loop, how having a defined aesthetic contributes to authority, and your authority then helps dictate your aesthetic. Then we're going to apply aesthetic thinking through our thought leadership and also identify some common gaps that might dilute your authority. So what are some of the mistakes that you might be making that actually make it harder to understand what it is you're trying to communicate? Lastly, a working framework to actually style your leadership in practice. So that's all that good, happy stuff. I kicked off this presentation when I gave it in person with our brand video. If you haven't seen that yet, it's on the homepage of our website. It's also pinned to the top of our YouTube channel, so I'll spare you there. But it basically led me into the conversation about our work. So, as a brand design group, brand design agency, we help build brag-worthy brands. And brag-worthy brands is going to be important here. It'll come up later in the presentation. But we work across all different industries and with all different sized businesses. So, really, the common thread of what we do is trying to elevate brands to brag-worthy status. And we mean that by create a visual aesthetic that looks like the way that it feels to work with you. So you'll notice we also work across different styles, different color palettes, fonts, photography. There's a lot of stuff in the mix here, but the commonality of all of these brands is our number one goal is to make your brand look like what it feels like to work with you or buy your product. Which leads me into our brand. So, the MKW Creative Co brand is very obviously an extension of my aesthetic because the way that I think and the way that I do my job has to be reflected in our marketing. So, you'll see there's lots of color, there's lots of flavor here. It's a little bit sassy, it's casual, hoping it's casual. Hopefully, you just feel like I'm a friend in your ear giving you this advice, right? It's collaborative and it's bold and it's out there. And that is on purpose. We'll get into that later as well. But really, our challenge today is that leaders are judged not just by what they say, but how they present. And to me and to all of our clients and into the world that we live in, your aesthetic often talks before you do. So before you get the chance to introduce yourself, before you get your chance to really make an impact on somebody or help them, because we're all in the people business, we're all in the business of people helping people. Our challenge is really to create an aesthetic that very clearly tells people what you're all about before you even get the chance to say it yourself. And that's exactly why aesthetics matter in leadership. The first reason is because perception drives trust. People trust leaders who present with clarity and cohesion. When you are clear and cohesive in your messaging, it's going to drive more trust, right? That's the know, like, trust cycle. We talk about that a lot on the podcast. And even here, I've got our favorite quote from Brene Brown: clarity is kind. There's so much kindness in being clear and cohesive with what you have to deliver and what you have to say. And that then helps drive your own leadership and your own thought leadership, drives community building, drives business, all of these things that are so important. And I wanted to kick off with three really clear examples from pop culture of women specifically who do a really good job at this, right? So their perception, their brand perception is what drives people to trust them to be an authority in each of their domains. The first being Oprah Winfrey. If you're a child of the 90s, you remember coming home from school and your mom would turn on Oprah at 4 o'clock and watch these hard hitting interviews. And she could be interviewing a doctor or an athlete or a lawyer or someone who's just a regular person that had an extraordinary story. She is giving each of those people the care and the attention and asking those like deeply emotional, hard questions. And she presents herself as such. Now, when she attaches her name to something, you know you're going to get some of those qualities alongside anything Oprah's got going on, right? To the same vein, Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart, homemaker extraordinaire, businesswoman, and now kind of getting into more of her sassy, I don't give a fuck kind of energy. But Martha Stewart really represents this perfect, ideal, how easy is that kind of home, right? So she's got her always showing herself in usually a domestic setting. That is her visual communication. It's showing her looking face to camera. She's warm, she's inviting, but she's also going to be doing something relating to the home. That is her domain. So you would ask her, you would go to her as the authority on things like hosting and party throwing and cooking a great, easy, delicious meal for 40 people. That's her area. That's her domain. Then we have Taylor Swift, right? Perception drives trust. So what we perceive of Taylor Swift to be a mastermind, which is also part of her messaging and her marketing, is that even though she has all these different aesthetics across all these different albums, you know, if it's got Taylor Swift's name attached to it, there is going to be a through line. And that through line is deep storytelling, lyrical mastery, and earwormy songs, right? That get so stuck in your head and are so pervasive in our culture. And each of these people really represent how the perception drives trust. When they put their name to something, we trust that it's going to be of quality because of how we perceive them as experts in each of their spaces. Next is the attention economy, and this is why aesthetics matter in leadership. So in a world of noise, aesthetic helps cut through to make your ideas more memorable. And this is exactly what I mean with these three examples. First, Brat Summer. Second, Barbie movie. Third, TS12, which by the time we have recording, we now know is Life of a Showgirl. So even though all three of these things had a very clear sound and very clear message, the aesthetic is actually what's deriving the attention in our social media, in our culture. So Brat Summer was pretty hard to ignore because of this fluorescent green and this almost anti-aesthetic or anti-pleasing kind of look, right? So it's got Arial font in black on a bright green background. That became so synonymous with the sound of Charlie XCX. So it's pretty hard to ignore. It became an absolute cultural phenomenon. And that green was pretty hard to miss for the entire summer. Same with Barbie, right? You see that shade of pink, you know it's Barbie. You see this type of imagery that's glossy and plastic on purpose, you know it's going to be Barbie related. And if there's any proof to that, it's all the collaborations that came out of that Barbie movie, right? So if you see a brand using the pink, you know immediately that it was associated with that Barbie movie. Same could be said for TS12. So I gave this presentation the week that we found out that she was dropping an album, but it had not been released. I think it got released later that day. The amount of brands that participated in sharing a blurry green background with an orange something of their product, glittery orange on top, was too many to count. And that just goes to show that in the attention economy, again, if someone's name is attached to it, their thought leadership is attached to the aesthetic, people will sink their teeth into and attach themselves to the visual cues that then symbolize those things, right? So proof, attention economy is everything. And to cut through the noise in social media, having a strong aesthetic, having strong colors, fonts, styles, textures, glitter, for example, is what helps you stick in people's minds and helps other people pay attention to what it is that you're trying to say. Next is the neuroscience of visuals. Our brains process images 60,000 times faster than text. So a well-crafted visual leaves a lasting leadership impression. And I pulled for this one 3 different examples of female founders that have a strong connection between themselves and their product. Granted, these are all product-based founders. It's a little more difficult as a service-based business, I would say. But here we can even see the difference between someone like Candace Nelson from Sprinkles, Hailey Bieber with Rhode, and Sarah Blakely from Sneaks, and also Spanx, right? So Candace Nelson, she's going to be that gal next door. It's friendly, it's approachable, it's sweet, it's warm. It's got the cupcake feeling, right? She's showing herself with her cupcakes in her headshot. And her cupcake also has a very signature aesthetic, her very proprietary singular sprinkle to the top of the cupcake. She talks about that in her book quite in depth. That's a really great case study for connecting aesthetic to personal leadership. Same Hailey Bieber with Rhode, but in a different direction, right? Her packaging is very tone on tone. It's minimal, it's editorial, and she shows herself as such. She shows herself as being unattainable on purpose because she is unattainable. She's a celebrity. So it's helping to sell the makeup and the skincare because it's positioning her as being the thing that you are musing over, right? So different than Candace Nelson, who feels familiar and feels next door. Hailey Bieber feels unattainable and admirable in her own way, but not the same kind of aesthetic vision happening here. Then you have Sarah Blakely, who's somewhere in the middle, who's kind of this quirky business owner, but still editorial and fashion and successful, and showing that quirky side coming through and also mirroring the design of these sneaker heels, right? So whether you love them or hate them, they definitely left an impression and showcased just how that person functions as a leader, out of the box, creative, breaking down industries, creating new categories. She's showing herself as such, she communicates as such, and her products are as such. Next, we need to consider the aesthetic authority feedback loop and how a defined aesthetic helps cement your authority, and your authority then informs your aesthetic. What I mean by this is how clarity of vision lends itself to more credibility. So when you and your ideas follow an intentional aesthetic, they feel worthy of our attention. When you are clear, clarity is kind, Brene Brown again here, with what your look is, people trust you more. The example I give is if you are in class and every day you sit next to a student and one day they're dressed as a jock and the next day they're a nerd and the next day they're boho and then the day after that they're super buttoned up and conservative, you'd be confused about how to relate to them. You don't know your entry point. You don't know who they are and how they're communicating because it's different all the time. And so often we see this with branding. Entrepreneurs that get kind of shiny object syndrome and want a new logo every 3 months, and how damaging damaging that can be for building your credibility. And we really want to, in a leadership capacity, continue to build your credibility through a clear vision and therefore clear aesthetics. Okay, entrepreneurs, this one is for you. You know I'm all about making your brand work for you, and this is where Sticker Giant comes in. They get it. Whether you're a small business, a creative freelancer, or someone just starting out, Sticker Giant wants to help you tell your stories with custom stickers and labels. They really make your products look pro, your packaging pop, and your brand stick in people's minds, literally. So if you're ready to take your brand to the next level, visit stickergiant.com and become part of the KMA community by using code KMAPodcast25 at checkout on stickergiant.com to get 25% off your first order. See how they can help you bring your ideas to life. You definitely won't regret it. Sticker Giant, your partner in creating brag-worthy branding. I then pulled some examples from our own portfolio. So a great example of this case study is Lindsay Silberman with Hotel Lobby Candle, Hotel Lobby Home. Make sure you listen to her episode. But her personal aesthetic is reflected in the brand, and the brand reflects her personal aesthetic. We're talking high-end, luxe, aspirational, concierge style service, 5-star style service. It's dreamy, it's ethereal, it feels luxury on purpose because that's how she's bringing her thought leadership to the table. As a former editor, as a fashion influencer, as a lifestyle influencer, she occupies that space. So her products and her branding reflects her, and she is reflected in the products and the branding. And the branding vice versa, right? So what we're doing is creating that cohesion. We're creating the clear vision that's giving her more credibility as an authority figure in her own leadership. I can speak to what the hotel lobby experience is because I'm the person that stays in hotels. So that's where her credibility is coming through, is being the authority on the subject. So we needed an aesthetic that was going to communicate that. So the power suit that's bright white and clean and crisp, just like those linen sheets in a beautiful hotel, right? So that's where we're seeing those two things play upon each other. Next is cohesion and confidence. When things are cohesive, you feel more confident about communicating them. And when they're not cohesive, you're like, oh no, please don't look in my messy house, in my messy car, in my messy mess, right? So consistent aesthetics make you feel trustworthy and reliable because we're relying on the fact that you're going to show up similarly each time that we interact with the brand. That also makes you really easy to refer. It's easy for people to know who you are and what you do and who you help when you show up consistently and confidently than if you're constantly changing course. And so in your thought leadership, in your business, in your product, in your marketing, having cohesion between all the touch points is essential. The example here is Tiffany Jones with Avenue 8 Cocktails. Please go listen to her episode, linked in the show notes, which her background and her story greatly influenced the aesthetic of her product. So she is an interior designer in Dallas, Texas. So her southern side and also her design side had to really kind of come to the surface when we were designing for Avenue 8. The product itself is the kind of product that she wished existed. And so her origin story is about creating a canned cocktail with authentic, organic ingredients, formulation that were on the can, transparency as to ingredient lists and nutrition information, and also something that you would be proud to have on your bar cart, something that was aesthetically beautiful, that felt like it was reflective of her own life as an interior designer, but also was sophisticated and feminine and welcoming and curated and a little bit punchy, kind of like that Jonathan Adler kind of style. There's a little bit of sass to it. This branding, again, is cohesive, which gives her the confidence to enter those spaces that are male dominated, especially in alcohol. So having her cohesive Instagram to web to packaging to print gives her that extra boost. And then her confidence is also what gives it the cohesion, because that's part of the brand value. That's part of what's bringing this full circle is the thought leadership, the aesthetic, and the authority. Next is memorability and influence. Being memorable gives you more influence, and being influential helps you stay memorable. So a distinct visual presence allows you to actually become that category of one while also building community. We talk about this a lot with like imposter syndrome or trying to do what other people are doing, not putting the blinders on and sticking in your lane to really offer something unique. And the client that came to mind here is Allie Pierce with Gallivant Society. Please listen to her episode, linked in the show notes, because her space is very crowded, and it's very crowded by a lot of women. Being a travel advisor and travel influencer, she hosts women's trips all around the world for women that want the most maximal version of their life, the most colorful, the most bold, the most adventurous, the most layered cultural experiences. So for her branding, we had to create something that was going to have the level of memorability to help her stand out in a very, very crowded kind of landscape. If you'll notice when you're online and you're looking at similar competitors, they almost often use like shades of blue and a serif font. And there are some very clear, consistent elements from brand to brand to brand, especially in travel, but not only with the brand name, but the aesthetic of her company is really intended to become memorable and therefore help her gain more influence. She already has a pretty big influence. She's got a great social media presence. She's a loud and out there personality, which helps. But that's also giving us that point of brag-worthy status where the visuals are then a reflection of the quality of the service. So her visuals are a reflection of who she is, how she thinks, the kinds of experiences that she's trying to lead, the kind of business that she's trying to have, and then how that gets reflected back to her audience. So the more she can lean into her own things that make her unique in a crowded space is the more that allows her to be like the girl for this type of trip specifically, and not anything else. Not the quiet trip, not the party trip, but the luxury, colorful, experiential, unique trip. That's where she's at. That's her lane. And so the visuals then reflect those qualities back to the audience. Then we have to think about how we apply all this aesthetic thinking to our thought leadership. And that comes about by branding yourself as a thought leader. And what this means is actually aligning your personal vision with your core visuals. So in each of those examples, Allie, Tiffany, Lindsay, they all aligned their personal background, their personal story with their aesthetic. Now we get into a little bit of a sticky situation because you're supposed to be branding, of course, to your ideal client. And I think there's a very big argument to be made for the fact that you're not designing for yourself. You should be designing for the people that can pay you and want to pay you, which is true. But when it comes to personal leadership, you still need to be represented in the work that you do. And I think that comes across in how you present yourself and how that reputation precedes you. So that is also your fashion and your styling. It's your personality. It's the colors, the patterns, the textures, and the feelings of how you present yourself in a room full of people or digitally online. It's also all your collateral. So it's your fonts, your colors, your material selections, your website, your social media. And then I have even here an asterisk, it's messaging, delivery, and cadence. So your messaging and your delivery, how you say what you say, if you talk with your hands like I do, if you're making inside jokes, the actual tone of your voice, the speed of your speech, that is also something that starts to influence your branding as a thought leader. And what this comes back to is really that brand personality matrix. So this is a tool that I've used in plenty of branding exercises where we try to figure out where you fit and where your business fits on this kind of matrix that we have here. So we have a spectrum from serious to goofy. We have a spectrum from firm to gentle. I'd say our brand lives somewhere in the spontaneous, sassy, quirky, energetic area, but yours might be different. And I think you can think about not trying to exhibit just one of these qualities, but find a quadrant or find 2 or 3 variables that feel like is an accurate representation of who you are, what you do, and who you help. But then also remember that the brand personality matrix, whichever those adjectives are not necessarily constants. So think of the brand personality or the personality that you're trying to communicate as a leader as being on a spectrum as well. So there are times when you are going to be more serious. There are times when you're going to be more silly. And finding that sweet spot or pulling yourself back to center is about trying to find the balance between how you present and what you're presenting and to whom and how you're presenting it to them. So that's where the audience comes into play, right? Because we may feel a certain type of way about ourselves as founders, as thought leaders, etc., but you got to match where your audience is at. So you may be that person that has to find that special spot between staying rooted and remaining agile. So those are some notes on kind of figuring out your personal brand personality. That personality then brings you into aesthetic, and aesthetic choices usually come about through color. I created, if you're watching on YouTube here, a little color wheel with some of the qualities that we most associate with each of the colors. So if you're on the warmer side of the color palette, playful, empathetic, passionate, creative, brave, energetic. If you're on the cooler side, regal, safe, trustworthy, calm, healthy, right? There's different ways that you can combine colors from the color palette. But what I was really talking about with this group this week was about how to hone in on a few colors that really feel like a true reflection of what you care about and what you want people to remember about you. And use that not only in your brand, but in your professional, how you show up professionally. So, a great example of this is the dress that I wore for this actual presentation had tons of colors in them. But the presentation itself really honed in on this yellow and blue combination. So, it's energetic and it's trustworthy. I want you to feel fired up from this presentation. And I also want you to feel like the information that's coming out of it is worthy and is honest and is truthful. So that's kind of where the color psychology can come into play. You can get really nerdy about color psychology. I often do. But a good rule of thumb is sticking to this color breakdown. So 60% of the time using one main brand color. Second would be 20% of the time using that supporting color. Third, 10% of the time, pick a few tints and shades, pick a few variations on those two colors to give you some variety in your, whether it's your outfit, your presentation deck, your website, your social, etc. And then finding an accent color to give you a sense of pop. Also important is curating those environments and experiences to be a reflection of your personal brand. So designing spaces or hosting spaces for people to connect, whether they're physical or virtual, supports your leadership identity by connecting how people feel with who you are as a leader. So two examples of this. One would be the Gallivan Society launch party. If you're on our Instagram, you've seen all about this. It needed to feel like the way that the brand looked, which is also the way that Allie is. So creating an environment that was like sensory overload, like it was pattern, color, flavor, texture, style, all in one was really important to pulling that event off successfully. Alternatively, our MKW Creative Co team retreat, which is just as colorful, was really about showcasing collaboration. And I needed imagery to help communicate how our team works together, even if we work virtually. So in one of the photos you see here, we're actually FaceTiming with one of our team members who couldn't make it, which was perfect because that's more accurately how we all work together. But I wanted to show how the collaboration happens between people. So it's that hand stack in the middle. It's showcasing how we are able to do our jobs well, even if we aren't in person all the time, by showing us in person and communicating our own vision and giving the visual of what it feels like to work with us, even if we might not physically all be in the same space. Then we get into digital presence. And this is the last kind of note I'll make before we get into the common mistakes. Ensuring that your social media and your website and all of your digital presence has consistency helps reinforce your brand. So this is where the aesthetic really comes into play, right? The colors, the textures, the fonts, the styling, the logos, etc. Something I think people do or they don't pay attention to is how much their own leadership aesthetic gets co-opted by other environments or other people. So event photography is a great example. If you go somewhere and the images aren't in your branding, how can you make it feel more like you? How can you take information from a sales deck or a presentation or a recap from something and make it feel more like your brand? So you'll see in the example on YouTube, we have my website, podcast cover, social media, and YouTube channel. They feel consistent. That's on purpose. We want to make sure that no matter where someone lands in your brand universe, they feel like they're in the right place. And that comes through with aesthetic. So if you landed on someone's Instagram and you clicked over to their website and it looked totally different, it might cause you pause because it's not cohesive and it's not consistent. And you'd go like, wait a minute, did I click on the wrong thing? And that hesitation itself is enough to deter someone to getting to your actual thought leadership. So making sure that there is visual consistency is huge. And especially in a digital presence and a professional sense, having that feeling that you're in the right spot is going to help continue to drive your authority and drive your thought leadership. Getting into common gaps that might dilute your authority. These are things that happen that sometimes we pay attention to and sometimes we don't, but can actually undermine your ability to communicate your thoughts and your thought leadership, which will start first with overcomplicating your message with cluttered visuals. If you are a novice designer or you are not a designer at all, or again, you're kind of outsourcing things to someone who doesn't really understand your aesthetic because you haven't established your aesthetic, your central message can get really lost. So, what you're trying to say can get lost if the visuals aren't accurately communicating what it is that you have to say. Because again, our brains process imagery 60,000 times faster than the written word. So your vision should be clear and not confusing. Remember, clarity is kind. And oftentimes people overcomplicate what it is they're trying to say by doing too much. So this is your reminder to edit, to curate, and to refine what it is your aesthetic is. So too many colors, too many fonts, too many photos, too many styles going on, and a general lack of consistency will undermine your authority. So again, inconsistency between platforms or physical cues is what's going to sell you short from really being perceived as a leader. It's hard to stick in this attention economy if you're inconsistent. So having that really, really clear set of guidelines for this is how I show up in these spaces, and this is how I show up when I'm a guest speaker, and this is how I show up when I'm on a podcast. That's going to help you continue to assert your authority, assert your visual aesthetic, and also assert your leadership and your thought leadership and your own message that you have to share with people. The consistency here is very, very, very key. Lastly, allowing others to define your aesthetic by default. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier. When you lack control over your personal brand perception and connection, is that comes about when we're not intentional about how we're presenting. So thinking about, okay, if I'm going to go to a networking event, I'm going to wear a necklace with my initial on it so that people can connect me to my name. I'm going to wear a color that's in my brand colors. I'm going to make sure that I'm talking to people in a certain type of way. I'm going to make sure that when people go to my social media from meeting me in person, that there's consistency there, that there is that ability to connect all the dots. But really, it's when we allow others to define the aesthetic by their default that it undermines your authority. So, for example, if every time I was a guest speaker, every time I was a guest on someone else's podcast, I was only using their graphics to promote the show, it would start to undermine the quality of the information because people would see it and be like, "Oh, what is this? I don't know this. I don't trust this. This isn't what I'm used to from her. Therefore, I'm going to maybe not be in all the way." So, making sure that when you are doing those marketing efforts or you are putting yourself out there and your thought leadership out there, that you're finding ways to bring it back into the way that your universe exists and the way your universe looks is key. Last, and certainly not least, I want to leave you with a framework for how to do styled leadership in practice. And I've broken that into 4 steps. They all happen to start with A, which is going to make it very memorable. Audit, articulate, align, and amplify. First, you have to audit. So the first thing to do here is really take a look at everywhere that you show up visually. So web and digital, social media, print and physical, fashion and styling, and your asterisk messaging and cadence. Put it all out on the table. We got to look at everything to figure out what's working and find the common threads to then articulate how you do what you do better than everyone else or how you do what you do differently from everyone else. So, really getting clear on defining your professional and leadership aesthetic in 3 to 5 words will help you greatly. So, my leadership aesthetic is definitely going to be high energy. It's going to be casual and it's going to be sassy. I'm going to throw out an F bomb every once in a while. Like this show is called Kiss My Aesthetic for a reason, right? And those words are going to help you then get really crystal clear on your mission statement. If you've been a long time listener of the show, you know we always start with who you are, what you do, who you help, and how you help them. That is the perfect recipe for a mission statement. And that's really the statement that you want someone to say about you when you're not in the room. I would hope that someone who's talking to someone who needs branding, who knows me, can say, "Oh, you should work with Michelle. She runs MKW Creative Co. They build brag-worthy brands and she does rebranding." That's the sentence I'm looking for, right? And in that, you may have noticed we have that brag-worthy tagline. That's the one memorable phrase that summarizes your vision, your process, or your ethos. So articulating all of these things, the 3 to 5 aesthetic words, the mission statement, that memorable phrase, tagline, process, ethos, that recipe is what's going to get you to alignment, which is where we actually match visuals to each of those strategic pieces. So that means either working with a designer, hey, we'd love to work with you, or strategist, hey, we'd love to work with you, or you can DIY, but really you want to find the colors, fonts, patterns, textures that match everything we just talked about. They match the adjectives, they match the mission, and they match that vision in that like one memorable key phrase. I also recommend coming up with kind of a brand uniform. How do you show up professionally, physically in person? What are the colors, the styles, the brands that really reflect your personal thought leadership and your personal aesthetic? For me, that's Farm Rio. Shout out, Nuuly. I love to rent my clothes from Nuuly. And then if I love it, I buy it. And I'm trying to find those pieces that are memorable and playful and fun and colorful and invite people in, but also that I feel confident in. Because when you have confidence, it gives you more cohesion. And when you're cohesive, it gives you more confidence, right? So those things feed each other. So for me, that looked like wearing the dress that I wear in our brand video that's at the top of our website in the presentation. So that's my presentation dress. So when I go give a talk somewhere and people are meeting me for the first time, they can connect that look with these thoughts. And that's what we're going for. The next is styles and mood. And I think this is where things can shift, right? You're not locked in. You're not one thing always and forever, but figuring out what are the different styling things I can do. And styling, I mean more loosely here, like more curating, right? What's the mood that I'm trying to give off? What can I use from a media standpoint, whether that's audio, video, photo, written, blog, podcast, etc., that can also help to communicate all of these strategic goals, that can also give people the feeling of what it's like to work with us. All of these things should also really reflect your aesthetic and your personal authority. That's where we're trying to get to, is linking those two things together. How can the way that not just I look, but my brand looks, or my ideas look, or my community looks, how can that also reflect my authority and vice versa? How can what I know be reflected in the way that things look? Last, and certainly not least, amplify. You want to use this thought leadership and aesthetic to catapult you professionally. And this means really creating that memorable visual signature. What's going to be the thing that you're known for? How can you stay consistent across all those touch points and repeat yourself? There's a statistic that says people don't actually understand or remember a concept or an idea until they've had 17 different exposures to that idea on average. So think about every single time someone talks to you, that's one of the 17 times they're going to need to be exposed to your brand before they take action. So it could be that they're watching on TikTok Live right now when I'm presenting this podcast. It could be that they watch this YouTube video later, or that they were in the actual talk. And then maybe they're also being exposed to me through Instagram stories. And then we're at the same event. And then you're always working up to 17 different touch points. So that's just like another fun thing to play with in your head and think about how your thought leadership, what you think, what you feel about the world, how you do what you do, for whom, that can get reflected in your aesthetic, and that aesthetic can reflect your thought leadership. Which brings us all the way to the end of this big juicy presentation with a thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. This was Style to Lead, intersection of aesthetic and authority. This is a talk that I gave for a leadership group, and you're getting access to it for free because I'm nice. And to pay me back as a thank you, I would love if you would share this with someone. So if you could send it to a friend, save it, comment, like it, share it. It would mean a lot to us. Also, don't forget to review us wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps us greatly. We'd love to get to 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel so we can monetize, so that we can keep creating this content for free. I love doing it. I have a passion for it, and I have a passion for helping you build your brand. So if you have a business or a personal brand that you're looking for help with, this is the call to action. We'd love to work with you. You can fill out our contact form, mkwcreative.co/contact, and we'll see you there. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye.